welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty, coming to you live on Tuesday afternoon. Today is August 27th, and we have a variety of different NFL topics to come to you with today. We are going to be starting off with breaking down the CeeDee Lamb deal a little bit further. Yesterday, it literally broke 5 minutes before the show, so we're giving some initial reactions there. But I want to look a little bit deeper and talk about winners and losers across the NFL from this deal coming to fruition. So we'll be breaking that down. Additionally, I want to look into the quarterback battle that is still ongoing within the New England Patriots organization and why the way that this has all been playing out could mean a little bit of trouble for rookie head coach Jerod Mayo moving forward here. We will then be talking about what the expectations should be for Deshaun Watson in this upcoming season. Former NFL linebacker Manti Te'o had some thoughts about how Cleveland should proceed with him, so we'll be talking about that. We will be giving you the latest updates on the NFL cut day, as the deadline is just a couple hours away from when every NFL team needs to reduce their roster to 53 players. So we will give you the latest updates there. And then finally, we will cap off the show by breaking down the upcoming season for the Los Angeles Rams and making a prediction on where they will stand by the end of the season. So a whole lot to dive into. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder that if you've got a question during the show that we want to hear about it, your input is a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and insights. Whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, whatever you may have on the sports world, do not hesitate to drop it in the chat. And if you want to go a step further, you can use the super chat button as well on YouTube to have your comment pop up on screen and become a bigger part of the show for everyone to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Helps us continue to build this channel here and continue to deliver you entertaining sports content. So anything would be greatly appreciated there. If you would prefer, you can also go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, to give us your comments. So, again, anything would be very greatly appreciated there. Like I mentioned, just yesterday, it was 5 minutes or so right before the show, the news was announced that the Dallas Cowboys are signing star wide receiver CeeDee Lamb to a brand new contract extension. It is anticipated to be 4 years worth $136 million. It is just behind Justin Jefferson's deal as the second highest wide receiver contract in terms of average annual value. Believe it additionally makes him the second highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. So the Cowboys, after what was a little bit of a stalemate for a lot of the offseason in terms of will they, won't they pay their 3 stars eligible for contract extensions, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, and Micah Parsons, they get the first one done. Again, 4 years, $136 million, $100 million guaranteed. Now, we don't have, I believe, the exact details in terms of the annual breakout per year of what his hit is going to be against the salary cap. So that's something that's going to be important to keep an eye on as to what it looks like moving forward here, because as we're going to talk about a little bit later in the segment, Cowboys have a lot of very important players coming up on expiring contracts in the next year or so, and depending on how they space out this massive amount of money that they are paying CeeDee Lamb is going to be very important as to how they can act in these next couple seasons. But I wanted to sort of take the angle today to talk about winners and losers from the fallout of this deal. The first very obvious winner, of course, is CeeDee Lamb. where Lamb now is a $136 million man, and it is very much deserved based off of everything that he was able to accomplish last season. I mean, he's just continued to year after year get better, but last season reaching new heights, becoming an all-pro first-team player, leading the NFL in receptions, having 1,700 yards across the board. Everything went perfectly for CeeDee Lamb to set him up, again, deservingly so, to arrive at this type of a contract. So obviously, again, big winner is CeeDee Lamb, but sort of stemming off of that as well is the idea that I think that Ja'Marr Chase is a very big winner out of this deal as well, considering the fact that he's the wide receiver that sort of, at least to me, feels like the natural next guy to get bank-breaking money, because of the fact that he is still so young, just 24 years old. He has been able to establish himself so early on in his career as a very reliable wide receiver one. Being the first option for Joe Burrow and this Bengals offense, he has had no less than 1,000 yards in any season. That's including in 2022 when he played in just 12 games. That's including last year with all of the injuries that were occurring with Joe Burrow that sort of knocked him off of his spot. The production has continued to be there for Ja'Marr Chase, and I feel like, in my head at least, there is very little doubt that he's going to continue to get better as the years go on. And I think that he is the natural next player to get this contract, which sort of leads me into our first loser of this deal. And I think that that is the San Francisco 49ers, because Brandon Ayuk is, I would also argue, a little bit of a winner as well, but more than Ayuk being a winner, I think, is the 49ers being a loser out of this, because Ayuk is also very much in play to get a massive contract, whether it's an extension with the 49ers in the next year or so, or if it is when he eventually hits free agency and he signs with a new team. Brandon Ayuk is 1,000% going to get paid. I think that in terms of how much they are going to make, just my personal guess and predictions on, what this probably looks like for Ja'Marr Chase versus Brandon Ayuk financially speaking, I think that Chase probably has a little bit more of a backbone to his case of becoming the next highest paid wide receiver in the league. He's a couple years younger. Like I mentioned, he has shown that he is a true wide receiver one. I think that Brandon Ayuk is a wide receiver one on the majority of teams. But that being said, obviously with all of the different weapons in San Francisco, it's not like he gets that level of opportunities yet, which you can use in either direction. And on one hand, you can make the argument that once he goes to a team and becomes the wide receiver one, he's going to start to get the number of targets of a Ja'Marr Chase or a CeeDee Lamb, and that he will be able to live up to those expectations, or that when he has this change of scenery, there is a chance that it could be exposed a little bit. A recent example of this, and not saying I have much more faith in Brandon Ayuk than this, but just walk with me here. A recent example, of course, is Juju Smith-Schuster, who had those years when he was the number 2 to Antonio Brown, was never able to fully recapture that, had a nice season in 2022, but again, it's just very clear he was never a true wide receiver one. I think that Brandon Ayuk is capable of that, but all of this tied back into San Francisco is, I think that the market just took a big time bump in terms of how much these star wide receivers are going to get paid. San Francisco already knowing that they are going to be due for multiple big contracts in these next couple years, mostly predicated on the fact that Brock Purdy is going to be incredibly more expensive now in a couple years relative to what he is now. And these deals that come off the shelves for these wide receivers, I think only hurts the 49ers chances of being able to retain Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk is going to ask, especially after all of this public drama that's taken place over the course of the offseason. I think that he is going to be looking to get paid wherever that may be, and there's a chance that, he sort of pins this CeeDee Lamb contract against the 49ers in negotiations, because you're talking about Ayuk, who was first team All-Pro last year, or second team All-Pro, last year, and should be continuing to build on that. Another guy who just feels like has gotten better and better with each season in the NFL. So that is definitely something that I'm keeping an eye on as well. Another loser here, I'm giving it to the Dallas Cowboys. Now, they aren't losers in this deal in the sense that it was the wrong deal to make. CeeDee is very much worth the money that they just paid him. That being said, it's more about the process, about how the Cowboys have acted this offseason, that makes me think that they are a slight loser in this. Because why did they wait so long to get this deal done with CeeDee Lamb? And then if you're going to wait out the entire offseason, see Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown both get paid these massive deals, why pull the trigger now? Now, I think that if they had known that this was 100% going to be somebody they have to lock down, I think getting on top of it earlier rather than later would have saved them some money if they could get that in before the market was reset this offseason. But I also think that, now at this point, it's the argument as to why now is about, well, CeeDee Lamb was at least threatening the idea of whether or not he could sit out for this season. And I just don't think that that is a really realistic outcome of if they didn't pay him. Now, they 100%, the Cowboys are going to be reliant on CeeDee Lamb this upcoming season with a real lack of super talented running backs. You don't feel like there's much depth at the receiver position for the Cowboys. Some fine other options, some fine tight ends, but ultimately it's CeeDee Lamb and then a significant gap between the next highest skill position player, obviously not named Dak Prescott. But I understand. Cowboys felt like they were a little bit desperate in terms of bringing back CeeDee Lamb. My argument is I don't think there was any way that CeeDee was going to sit out a significant amount of games. I just don't think that that's really what NFL players are looking to do this year. Ever since Le'Veon Bell decided to do so, whatever year that was, 2016, 2017, something like that, I just don't think that holdouts are really to be expected. 2018 is when he held out, Le'Veon Bell, that is. But I don't think that that's really a realistic outcome here. And CeeDee Lamb, he could have only really afforded, quite literally afforded, considering with the collective bargaining agreement, the fines that you get if you sit out games. I don't think he was sitting out really any longer than 4 games, and you'd prefer for him to be there, but I kind of think that he would have been there. Now, that being said, I just want to be fair here. We did just see Chris Jones, defensive tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs. Him set out the first game of the Chiefs season last year, and his absence was missed, and the Chiefs ended up losing that game in the season opener against the Lions before figuring out the restructured contract and ultimately getting that deal done, at least for the time being. So it's not like it is an entirely unheard of thing for players to still sit out. We saw it last season. But I sort of have doubts about the legitimacy of those threats now in 2024. The NFL is a factory. I don't think that it benefits the players whatsoever to really sit out like that. So I kind of felt like a little bit of a panic move to me from the Cowboys. Again, I think it's a good deal, a good enough deal at least, with the value that you're getting out of CeeDee Lamb, that this shouldn't blow up in their faces unless something unforeseen occurs, like an injury. But I would just say to that as well that the timing of this just seemed so weird to me. And I think the Cowboys cost themselves more money by waiting as long as they did. And also just the order of events with still having Dak and Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons, I don't think was ever really going to be re-signed this offseason. But still having those two massive pieces not locked down for the long-term future, it doesn't make me feel all that secure with what the future of the Cowboys looks here. I'll throw in one very light little winner in here as well, and that's going to be Trey Lance. He's not a winner based off of how he's been playing in the preseason because it's been very rough for him, including 5 interceptions this past weekend. I have concerns with the Cowboys salary cap situation moving forward. You look at, like I mentioned, Dak Prescott is going to be an unrestricted free agent. You're going to have Zach Martin as a free agent. Some key players on defense, such as DeMarcus Lawrence and Osa Odigizua. So they are going to have a lot of money to dish out over the course of the next year. I'm skeptical about whether or not this is actually going to a deal is going to be done with Dak Prescott. If that's the case, they're probably going to be good enough this year that they don't have a top-end draft pick to find the replacement immediately. Would kind of lead me to believe that if Trey Lance is ever going to prove himself with an organization, that he'd maybe have an opportunity, probably re-sign for a very cheap 1-year deal, bring in a veteran, and give Trey Lance an opportunity to compete for the starting job in 2025, assuming that Dak Prescott is no longer there. So again, a little bit of an unrealistic situation there, but I was trying to come up with different, creative ways to go about this winners and losers list, and Trey Lance, I'm definitely not, buying into the process all that much there, but again, I think that, at least very slightly, Trey Lance could be perceived as a winner here, but, let me know in the comments what you think. But we are now going to be diving into a story that we were actually initially going to cover yesterday before we got the breaking news of CeeDee Lamb, and that's breaking down the quarterback battle in New England after a very eye-opening, to some degree, Sunday night football game. I know it's just preseason, but we continue to see Drake Maye outplay Jacoby Brissett over these past couple weeks. And Jerod Mayo, a first-time head coach, has a lot of pressure surrounding him to make sure that he assesses this situation correctly. So we are going to be breaking down what needs to happen for the Patriots in terms of being able to definitively decide upon how to go about the beginning of the season and who's starting at quarterback. So we're going to be breaking that down. But first, we will be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into the quarterback battle in New England between Jacoby Brissett and third overall pick from the 2024 draft, Drake Maye. And this is a bit of an interesting conversation because headed into the season, it didn't really seem like this was going to be much of a conversation. That at least the way that I had perceived it coming into this year, they signed Jacoby Brissett in free agency to a 1-year, $8 million deal that he would be a bridge quarterback, and that Drake Maye, who coming out of North Carolina was seen as a little bit of a raw prospect, that they were going to sort of ease him into this process. And for whatever it's worth, can't coach scared in the NFL because that's how you lose your job. But that being said, the Patriots did just basically ruin a quarterback project in these past few years with Mac Jones, who doesn't have the ceiling that I believe Drake Maye does have, but I will forever stand on the fact that Mac Jones, if he were put in a better situation, could have at least been a fine NFL quarterback. Now, you may disagree with me in the comments section. That's totally fine. Let us know your thoughts on that. But that being said, I think it's at least something in the back of the mind of that Patriots organization. So between the two of them, again, it seemed like it was going to be pretty clear cut that Brissett was the guy, at least for the beginning of the season. But things have changed over the past couple weeks where it's sort of highlighted for us publicly based off of these preseason games. And we've seen two pretty different situations in the games. Now, obviously, whenever you're analyzing preseason action, you have to take into consideration the level of competition and whether or not opposing teams are actually going to give you schematically some of the keys to their defense. So, again, you got to take it with a grain of salt to some degree, but the two of them have had very different preseason showings up to this point. Both of them pretty minimal opportunities, especially Jacoby Brissett with just 5 drives, but you see the difference in sort of the overall production and I would say talent, especially between these two quarterbacks when they are in. Because Drake Maye, he has the athleticism as well that Jacoby Brissett doesn't. I think he is capable of making plays down the field that I feel much less confident in with Jacoby Brissett. You look at the difference in numbers. Brissett in his 5 drives, 5 of 14 passing, just 36 yards, and threw an interception. I could be mistaken here, but I don't know if the Patriots even got, I don't believe the Patriots got a single scoring drive out of a Brissett-led offense throughout the preseason. Now again, only 5 drives, so it's not like you're getting an extensive sample size there, but in opposition, you look at Drake Maye, who was coming off of the bench in every one of these games. So it's not like he was getting reps against first-teamers, but 10 drives, 21 of 34 passing, 192 yards in the air, 2 total touchdowns, 1 passing, 1 rushing. So Drake Maye, and no interceptions along there. Now, pretty extensive series of fumbles if you want to go that route. That's definitely been an issue. It's also an issue with the lack of center depth for the Patriots as well, with Leverett, who has been very tough, and the entire offensive line has been tough, which is a part of this conversation as well, which I know that offensive line talk, it's not exactly, sexy or anything, but it's massively important to, I think, this conversation as to who the Patriots should start, because they understand there is a chance, let's say hypothetically here, definitively speaking, Drake Maye is a quarterback that can give you a better chance to win from week 1. Let's just take that in this hypothetical as a fact. That being said, the Patriots are still not winning very many football games this year. It's about the locker room, and I think that this is incredibly important for head coach Jerod Mayo to sort of set the right tone with his locker room. And the way that he's been talking publicly is that this is a real competition, and that the job hasn't just been locked up by Jacoby Brissett, that Drake Maye has a chance to win this. And he has been very public with the media to some degree, and has been very vocal is probably the better way to put it, which is obviously a characteristic that we did not see in Bill Belichick, which I can appreciate. But that being said, he's kind of backing himself into a corner a little bit by the way that he's been dealing with the media. And just on Monday, after this game, again, Patriots playing Sunday Night Football against the Washington Commanders. It's preseason. Sure, the viewership numbers weren't crazy necessarily. I don't have them myself, but that being said, it was a national television game that was in a primetime slot. And the number one takeaway, and let me know in the comments section if you had a different takeaway, but all that stood out to me was, oh my God, this offensive line is a disaster. 8 penalties on the offensive line in the first half, from between when Jacoby Brissett was in the game and when Drake Maye was in the play. Left tackle Chukwuma Okorafor lined up in an illegal formation 3 different times throughout the first half, including a play that wiped off what was a pretty excellent play from Drake Maye, scrambling out to his left, throwing across his body down the sideline to KJ Osborne, who would have scored a touchdown, but again was taken away, not even because of a hold, but because of an illegal formation. And it was just a disastrous showing from this Patriots offensive line. So anyways, that very public on national TV. And not just that, though, as much as, yes, my takeaway was the offensive line, Drake Maye also did look pretty encouraging, like I just talked about. And Jacoby Brissett on the other side didn't look all that impressive. But not just that, is he ended up suffering a right shoulder injury because of the incompetence of the offensive line, where a botched blocking scheme. A pulling lineman got blown up by another lineman. The 2 guards ran into each other as Layden Robinson got blown off the line of scrimmage, so couldn't pull around, and he ended up just not being able to get to the right end, which ended up laying out Jacoby Brissett. City So, by the way, the left guard that I was just referencing, he actually went down as well with an ankle injury in this game. Don't have any official updates on that yet, but he was seen in a walking boot. So another tough dig at this already bad offensive line situation. But Jerod Mayo then went on a show on WEEI, a radio show in Boston, and I have the exact show as well. I can find it in a moment here. But he went on the radio show and was talking about the play of Drake Maye versus Jacoby Brissett, and he said, quote, "I would say at this point, Drake has outplayed Jacoby." And again, this is where he has made it, at least to the media, he has said that this is a competition all the way through, and that the best player will get the starting spot. And it's not just the preseason games, the reporting behind the scenes as well, and this is solidified a little bit as well by what Mayo said on this radio show on WEEI, that it's the Greg Hill show. I wanted to make sure I got my proper credit there to the Greg Hill show, and he's talking about how he's reaffirming that Drake Maye has looked better than Jacoby Brissett, even behind the scenes as well. So at this point, if the competition is really just about who is the better player today, Drake Maye might have already won that job. But at the same time, I think that that's a very risky decision to throw Drake Maye out week 1. And again, you can't coach scared. It's not how NFL front offices, coaches, players, anybody involved can operate business. But that being said, I would argue that you can make a mistake by starting Drake Maye week 1 and putting him in before he's ready and before the roster is ready. but you can't make a mistake by throwing in the bridge quarterback week 1 and just having Drake Maye take over whenever he gets the opportunity to. So, again, can't play scared here, but I do think that you could really screw this up for Drake Maye if you put him into a situation that he can't succeed, or just a situation that he's not ready for. Because again, going back to the numbers from preseason, they are definitely impressive, but that being said, it's preseason. So with all of the technical issues with his footwork and such that people had concerns with coming out of college, just because he looks pretty good against backup defenders, that doesn't mean that he is ready to step in week 1 and become the guy. I think that we've all sort of acknowledged that this is a little bit more of a long-term prospect. And we have a comment here from Anthony Manzano. Do you think the media is blowing out of proportion that the Patriots have given up completely under Maye and they feel like they made a mistake in drafting him so high? He also says, has serious mechanical issues that I don't think you can play through. I think he needs to sit a year. So here's what I'll say to your comment, Anthony, is I don't think that you can just play through mechanical issues either. And if we're talking about footwork and stuff like that, with the state of this offensive line, I have a really hard time imagining that it's going to get better. And with football, and specifically quarterbacking as well, I feel like it's in large part about the muscle memory and building habits. You don't want to form bad habits, especially as a young quarterback. Drake Maye is still 22 years old. There's plenty of time for him to fully come into form. So I think that I am sketched out a little bit about the idea of him starting immediately. That being said, I think that at this point the media, yes, they definitely blew out of proportion the stories about Drake Maye struggling at the beginning of the camp and them making the wrong decision. I stand by Drake Maye was the right pick for the Patriots. Even if he doesn't pan out, the Patriots kind of just needed to take a shot at that next quarterback because they had a golden opportunity. Drake Maye was in conversations for, being right below Caleb Williams early on in the college football season from at least, some of the draft sites that I was following, that Maye was a little bit closer to Caleb Williams than people initially thought. Now, I'm definitely not going that far as of now, but I think he is a prospect that's worth taking a shot on. He's got the physical tools, he's young, and I think he can develop into something. But I think that also, to your point about those mechanical issues, you can hurt confidence, as you alluded to as well. Just bad form, bad practice. We saw Mac Jones was basically seeing ghosts by the end of his tenure in New England, feeling pressures that sometimes weren't even there. Drake Maye, one of the most impressive plays from Sunday against Washington was the time when he was able to actually step up into pressure with his size, throw over the defensive lineman, and go downfield to what I believe was Jalen Polk on that play for a nice pickup. That I think Drake Maye has all of the tools to be able to succeed. Now, that being said, I think that it becomes a very interesting debate here on, well, if Maye is better than Brissett, should the Patriots just start him? And I understand, call me a coward if you feel that way, but I think that Jacoby Brissett should be the quarterback one to start the season, because I think that there's just no rush, in my opinion, to put Drake Maye into these scenarios that are not winning scenarios. The receiver core isn't strong. The offensive line isn't strong. And I think that you're talking about Maye, yes, could be better week 1, week 2 than Jacoby Brissett. But long-term outlook here, there's a very real chance you can be doing more harm than good. I don't know if I would jump the gun just based off of some preseason performances. Obviously, the coaches have a little bit more of a behind-the-scenes look there, so we'll have to see, but I would play it a little bit safer to start out here. I just don't see the real risk-reward situation here that the Patriots would really benefit from throwing Maye out there. I think just let him continue to work out, let him see what it looks like in the preparation heading into game week, and Drake Maye is definitely going to play this season if possible. I don't think that Jacoby Brissett is going to be the Patriots starting quarterback for the entire year. But, mental reps are a part of this as well. And again, maybe I'm walking too cautiously here with Drake Maye, but I think just ease him into it a little bit. Patriots don't have any expectations this year. You sort of get him continuing to be in the system, learning more, working with new offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt, even with some of these second team reps, getting more experience himself with some of these younger wide receivers like a Jalen Polk or a Javon Baker that could be his go-to guys by the time he actually gets an opportunity to step up in a big way. But I don't know. That's the way that I would look at it. As Anthony comments, I'm not sure if I agree with this, because if you throw in a young quarterback way too soon and he's having a few games, he tends to go to where he is comfortable. I mean, I would say that with a young quarterback, it's just in a situation like this, the way that I kind of view it is it's very hard to start the young guy, go to the experienced bridge quarterback, and then go back to the young guy in that same series. You want to talk about confidence issues? Tua Tagovailoa in his rookie season in 2020, I believe it was, would be my point to that, in terms of we saw his confidence getting yanked around by Brian Flores. He was taking Tua out of games to put in Ryan Fitzpatrick to finish off comeback wins and such. The whole thing was a mess. And truthfully, I don't know how much faith I have in the 2024 Patriots front office and coaching staff just yet. They could be good, but we don't know that definitively yet. And the past couple years would tell you that it's been very dysfunctional. So, a bunch of different ways to look at that. But again, let us know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But I want to move on to a different quarterback situation. This time, sticking in the AFC, going to Cleveland with Deshaun Watson, who is heading into another season here on this massive contract extension that the Browns are, at least up to this point, continuing to regret. But did Deshaun Watson show anything last season that could indicate that he could be the guy to lead the Browns to some playoff wins? We will be diving into that conversation, but first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? Is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as I want to now dive into the situation surrounding Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson. This is something that I've been sort of wanting to hit on him for a little bit, But things actually got even a little bit more interesting for me in this conversation when yesterday I was watching Good Morning Football and former NFL linebacker Manti Te'o made an interesting statement where he said that the Cleveland Browns should pull a Denver Broncos and, quote, move on from Deshaun Watson, which is a very interesting way to consider this type of a deal because the Browns still have Deshaun Watson for 3 more fully guaranteed seasons, where the cap hit will be just under $64 million a season. That is a ton of money to just eat and sort of move on from your roster construction from there. And I can't imagine there are too many Broncos fans that would say they love their current financial situation with the Wilson contract still on the books for a couple years. Now, that being said, to sort of counteract my own point, a lot of Broncos fans, I would almost guarantee every Broncos fan would rather have their current situation with a Bo Nix who was impressed during preseason, was a first-round selection, and whether or not you believe Bo Nix has the potential to be an elite quarterback, he's at least a young player, and that unknown entity about it does sort of at least draw excitement that Russell Wilson would have never been able to actually bring at that point in his career and where the Broncos were with him. So, you know, you can use that one way or the other. I would say 3 seasons to try and just eat those $64 million a year that go into the void of space that you're still paying him and has zero impact on your current roster. I don't think that is a model way to go about business. I understand that Browns fans probably would like just somebody, even somebody that is a little bit easier to root for based off of, you know, off the field considerations as well. But, you know, I think that for the Browns, I mean, is there a world, and really that's the question, is there a world where Deshaun Watson can at least resurrect his career to the point where he's not this massive negative that we're putting in the same conversation as that Russell Wilson deal? Last year for Deshaun Watson, he only played in 6 games. He threw for 185.8 passing yards per game, 7 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Wasn't very good overall. That being said, the Browns were 5-1 in the games that they played, and if you're trying to play optimist on this situation for Cleveland, I would say that his last 2 starts of the year were significantly more positive than what we had been seeing from Deshaun Watson from the end of 2022 to early on in 2023. Last 2 starts, Week 8 versus the Arizona Cardinals. It's the Arizona Cardinals. That was before Kyler Murray had returned, so it's not like that's a win you can really stick your flag in, but 27-0. He was facing Clayton Tune. He was good in the game. That's all you can really ask for him. I understand the Cardinals weren't that good, but you play who you play, and he was able to give you a positive performance in that game. To me, it's more about what he did in Week 9 facing the Baltimore Ravens, and he led a 4th quarter comeback win to take down one of the best rosters in the NFL in a division rival Ravens team, where stats at face value, you can look them up. I understand. They don't look great. He was 20 of 34 passing, 213 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. So again, not great there. But if you look a little bit deeper into how that game actually played out, it's something that I look at. It was probably, at least in my eyes, his best start of the season, given the fact that it's coming against the Raven. You had to put up points. It ended up being a 33-31 ball game. It wasn't like he was just standing back there handing the ball off and the Ravens offense was stymied. No, the Ravens put up 30 points. Deshaun Watson was able to top it, though, against the number two or number 1 scoring defense in the NFL last year. And you look, again, a little bit deeper. perfect completion percentage in the second half. The Browns were down by 14 points headed into the fourth quarter, and he was able to lead a touchdown drive where he ends up scoring. And then the Browns also benefited from their defense stepping up and coaxing Lamar Jackson into a pick six. That being said, even there should have been a tie game. Kicker Dustin Hopkins ends up missing the extra point, so the Browns are still down despite their 2 touchdowns. And then Deshaun Watson led a 5-minute game-winning drive where they were able to ultimately walk it off. And he did fumble the ball during that. They were able to hop back on it, but even after that negative play that lost them 8, he made it back up by hitting Amari Cooper for something like 17 yards and making it a manageable 3rd and short. The Browns have a good run game, which is always going to be something they can lean on. Deshaun Watson needs to be able to make the at least occasional special big play. And that is kind of where the conversation stems from with Deshaun Watson. When you talk about that Week 9 game against the Ravens, again, some hit, some miss in the game. His season ends up being finished there as he gets ruled out for the remainder of the season. But the Browns season obviously did not end there, where after a couple mediocre games with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, they end up bringing in Joe Flacco, who was good enough to help lead them to an 11-6 record and make the playoffs. Flacco, if I'm not mistaken, wins Comeback Player of the Year. He was good, but he wasn't that good to the point where I think it's impossible for Deshaun Watson to be able to live up to the level of play that Flacco had. Flacco's whole deal was that he was just sort of going to start to let it rip a little bit more, where he was throwing interceptions, but he was hitting some of the shots as well. That was a historically good defense last season. Hard to ask them to replicate that at the same level, but I mean, he can still, I think that Deshaun Watson can do similar to what Joe Flacco did. Flacco in his 5 starts with the Browns during the regular season, you are talking about him throwing 13 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, 1,600 yards. That being said, again, you want to talk about the difference in Deshaun Watson's approach versus Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco, just at that point in his age 38 season, he did not care about whether or not he was going to throw interceptions. 8 in 5 games is a lot, and he threw another couple, including some pick sixes in the playoff game against the Texans. But he threw for 323 yards per game. Joe Flacco in 2023. Who had that on their bingo card? Certainly not me. And I sort of say that as well just to think about what can Deshaun Watson learn from this. He has a good defense behind him. Watson used to be genuinely elite in 2020 when he led the league in passing. I think that he's still capable of, having the arm talent. I know it has not been good from what we've seen from him these past couple years, but I look at this situation with Cleveland and with Deshaun Watson. Is it salvageable? I think they sort of just need league average quarterback play from Deshaun Watson. It'll still be a bad deal considering all of the first round picks they gave up for him and the contract that they gave him. I understand you're never going to resurrect that into a good no-brainer move. That's not realistic, but you made the mistake. There's only so much you can do now. What's done is done. And if you can reconcile Deshaun Watson to give you the play of give me even a discount Jared Goff, which sounds kind of crazy, but Goff was a top 10 quarterback in the NFL last year. If you can give me, generally speaking, what Jared Goff gave the Lions last season, the Browns have a pretty good roster as a whole, I would argue, and I think that that's very much in play, and we could see a Browns team, again, with that defense, be playoff competitive once again. And I think that even just being a playoff team, getting a win, would at least feel like a win on what has gone down as a pretty disastrous contract and trade overall as a whole. But it's not like the Browns have to be buried because of it. Like, there is a way for them to at least reconcile some of it. I don't have high expectations for Deshaun Watson at this point. We're talking about 4 years since he's given you that really good, really high level of play. But he can still be worth something to this Browns team. And I think that that's the direction they should go with. To Manti Te'o's point about the Browns should just pull a Broncos, eat the money, and just get out of that deal. I don't think that that's a great way to go about business. You can't, like we've been talking about, the theme of these past couple days, I feel like, is you can't, act scared as an organization. You can't be too prideful on the other end, where you have to force yourself to make the most of a misstep in terms of a transaction in the past. But I think there's too many years left on the deal, and the Browns don't have a wide open option anyways, in terms of a succession plan for what takes place after Deshaun Watson. If this year goes really bad, Deshaun Watson looks unplayable, and they end up with a good pick, go for it, I suppose. I mean, it's not ideal, but you got to do what you got to do at some point. But I think that the Browns can actually win football games with Deshaun Watson starting. At the end of the day, that's what your goal is, winning football games. It doesn't have to be the prettiest thing in the world, but if you can be playoff relevant for the next few years, I think that just about any Browns fan, especially considering the history of that franchise, recent history especially, that they would probably learn to be okay with it. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. But we are now going to be diving into just a series of headlines that have taken place over the past 24 hours, as the deadline for NFL Cut Day is just over an hour away. We've gotten a handful of interesting moves, including one that just broke about 15-20 minutes ago that I want to dive into as well. So we will keep you updated on all of the latest there, but first we are going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as today is the deadline for the NFL Cut Day, where every NFL roster needs to reduce their number of active players to 53. Now, this is different in juxtaposition to years past, where there were gradual cut days throughout the preseason. Now it's just one big deadline where everything's got to go by then. So this can be a little bit hectic, and it's led to us getting a little bit of, extra interesting content push over these past 24 hours, and I want to dive into some of the more notable deals. And the first one I'll start with, where it doesn't seem like it's going to have all that much impact on the upcoming season per se, but I thought it was very interesting, where we saw Malik Willis, former quarterback of Liberty and of the Tennessee Titans, traded to the Green Bay Packers, getting just a 7th rounder in return. And this was a little bit of a surprise to me, where it felt like Malik Willis had a chance to succeed Ryan Tannehill when the Titans took him in the 3rd round of the 2022 draft. They knew that Tannehill's time was likely coming to an end, which turned out to be true. And Willis, in his rookie season, got 3 starts that across the board just were not good. So the Titans weren't really satisfied there. They decided they would take maybe another day 2 flyer on another option, and they ended up getting Will Levis, of course, with I think he ended up going 32nd overall, but in that second round pick based off of a forfeited pick from the first round. But Willis ends up going in the second round to the Titans, and it felt like they knew they were going to need another option. They weren't sold on Willis, and again, just day 2 flyer, see how it works out for them. And clearly Will Levis ended up winning that battle. I mean, there were talks about Levis potentially being a first round pick in that year in the 2023 draft. Didn't end up being the case, and he slipped to the second. But I mean, there was a lot to like about Levis coming out of school at Kentucky, where he was able to sort of overcome a bad offensive line. His numbers took a dip because of the fact that with that bad offensive line, he was dealing with some injuries, but the athleticism with him, the ability to get it done on the ground, that alone sort of is at least what caught the attention of me headed into the draft. And clearly that with a combination of other things caught the attention of the Titans. Now, Titans, they were at least before this deal went through, going to move on to the season with Will Levis, Mason Rudolph, and Malik Willis as your 3 quarterbacks. Now they send Willis out the door. As things currently stand, I can double check right now, but as I am fairly certain, Titans are left with just 2 quarterbacks in the room right now, which in 2024, that feels like a risky move to me. Now, I would think that there's probably some other move that is going to take place additionally as well, but feels like the Titans are short on quarterback talent, and I don't even know how great their current option is. Again, I like Will Levis. I liked what he was able to show when he played down the stretch of last season, but there's still very much an unknown with Will Levis as to whether or not he's going to work out. And it's not like they're going to bring in another quarterback that is the answer for them at this point. But Will Levis, like I mentioned, dealing with some injuries his final season. It's not like Mason Rudolph has a very extensive history of starting either. I think ultimately, when you look at sort of the quarterback situation in Tennessee, just feels very, very short to me. But very briefly here on the Packers side, they don't have great depth at the position either necessarily. It was Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt as their backups. They drafted Pratt in the 7th round out of Tulane. They just announced this morning, though, they are releasing Sean Clifford. So now the room is Jordan Love, Malik Willis, and Michael Pratt. It's a pretty solid room, if you ask me, to have some depth to that as well. So wanted to hit on that very quickly as well. Another quarterback note. Meant to bring this up earlier when we talked about the Patriots quarterback battle. It is official that they are waiving quarterback Bailey Zappi. Zappi mania was definitely a thing for a few weeks in New England during the 2022 season, but that's no longer the case. Zappi was not the answer. The Patriots ended up drafting 2 quarterbacks in this year's draft. They signed a free agent veteran in Jacoby Brissett. Zappi never had a spot here, so he's somebody who could, probably find his way onto a roster somewhere as a 3rd quarterback. But the Broncos, with decision to shop a little bit some veteran talent, where Samaje Perine and Tim Patrick, the running back and wide receiver, both veteran guys in the league, are expected to be released if the Broncos can't find a trade partner. Neither one of them obviously game breakers, but both players I think that could be a part of a playoff caliber team. Like, obviously not as feature running back or receiver, but could be a help veteran upgrade for a number of different teams that could be interesting. And then I want to dive into as well the trade that was just announced during the course of this show. This broke, I can double check the exact timing for you here, about 17 minutes ago. 43 minutes ago, maybe at this point, reported by Tom Pelissero initially is what I'm looking at, that the Los Angeles Rams are trading linebacker Ernest Jones IV to the Tennessee Titans. Jones isn't necessarily a household name by any means, but he was the leading tackler for the Rams last season with 145. I don't have the exact numbers ahead of me, but I have to imagine that that is, amongst the top ranks in the NFL as a whole. So that's a pretty significant move there, I would argue, is the loss of Ernest Jones from that Rams defense and ends up with the Titans. I kind of really like the signing there by the Titans to be able to pick him up. In exchange, I think they just had to give up a 2026 fifth rounder. The Titans actually also got a sixth rounder in return. So Jones, clearly the Rams didn't really have any intentions of making him continue to be a real go-to guy with the future of this defense. So they end up sending him out the door. A couple other quick notes here that, again, breaking down this news as it's sort of coming out. A couple other notable ones. The Kansas City Chiefs releasing wide receiver Kadarius Toney. Toney is a little bit infamous at this point after the flameout with the Giants after being a first-round selection a few years ago. He ends up going to the Chiefs, had his moments for whatever it's worth, especially on special teams, and I think he even might have caught a touchdown in the Super Bowl in 2022. You can fact check me on that, but I think he might have. But either way, Toney was a fine addition at the deadline for the Chiefs in 2022, but the drops with him were a story from the Chiefs season opener last year, and it just never got better for him. So they ended up releasing him. I feel like Toney's going to get another chance somewhere. I wouldn't put all that much faith in it. He's a very good athlete that I don't know if he necessarily fully gets credit for. Obviously, very much overshadowed by the amount of drops for him. So I can understand why people aren't necessarily jumping to give him all that much credit. But the last one I will give is that the Arizona Cardinals decided to release Desmond Ridder, which that one kind of came, I suppose, as a little bit of a surprise. We were just talking about the Cardinals yesterday in the season preview, and he was listed as the number 2 quarterback behind Kyler Murray. For whatever it's worth, with Kyler, he has an injury history. You feel like you might want some backup options there, but Clayton Tune seems to have beat him out for that number 2 job, as I just cannot believe, and this is probably one of the last times we'll ever talk about, unless, no disrespect, but probably one of the last times we'll ever talk about Desmond Ridder, at least here on this show. And I just cannot get over the fact that the Falcons passed on Lamar Jackson, Arthur Blank talking about how he's confident in what they have with Taylor Heineke and Desmond Ridder, when Lamar Jackson was very much on the table last offseason. Just crazy to me that was their plan, was Desmond Ridder, and now he's getting cut from the Arizona Cardinals for Clayton Tune. Just really tough situation there. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Again, some of these are maybe a little bit more minor, but interesting to keep up with. But I mentioned the Ernest Jones trade from the Los Angeles Rams, and I want to dive into that because Ernest Jones is not the only big loss from a significant contributor in 2023. The retirement of Aaron Donald, Raheem Morris leaving, their defensive coordinator leaving to take the head coach job in Atlanta, that this is going to be a different Rams team in this upcoming season. Will they be able to continue to succeed even with the losses of some big name guys? So we will dive into that debate, but first a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we head into our final segment of the day as we are previewing the seasons for every NFC West team. Yesterday we did the Arizona Cardinals, have them coming out at 8-9, and today we have the Los Angeles Rams, who last season were able to have a nice bounce back year considering how rough things seemed in 2022, that this Rams team has been a little bit of a roller coaster the past few seasons. They went all in for 2021, won the Super Bowl, felt the price of that a little bit in 2022, especially with a Matthew Stafford injury mixed in there to sort of take away even a good level of quarterback play. And then in 2023, I thought overall they were just able to overachieve in a number of different areas, with the fact that their defense really stepped up to a new level. The offensive line, which was a bit of a mess in 2022, they returned to play. The receiving core, Cooper Kupp, obviously, the star player for the Rams over the past decade or so, at least from a receiving standpoint. He's been dealing with injuries. In steps Puka Nacua for one of the best wide receiver rookie seasons of all time. So there were a lot of positives for the Rams last year. I do have some questions about whether or not are we fully confident that Matthew Stafford is going to continue to be the Stafford we've known for a decade plus, because last season I thought, and especially given, like I just mentioned, the injury in 2022, that I'm a little iffy on where Stafford is at this point. I love Stafford. He's been one of my favorite quarterbacks, as long as I've been watching football from the 2010s. I don't think that he got enough credit for some of those seasons in Detroit, and I'm definitely not writing him off, but I do feel like there is a very real world that we start to see regression kick in with Matthew Stafford, who's headed into his age 36 season, and he's gonna be, he's this season 36, turns 37 in February, but I don't know. I have some doubts with Stafford. Last year, you look at his stats, 15 games played. He had 3,965 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, the lowest completion percentage for him since 2014 at a pretty low mark in 62.6%, which isn't terrible by any means, but it's a step down in comparison to what we've seen as of late. Completion percentage, sometimes a little bit of an overrated stat anyways, so I don't want to harp on him too much for that. But I do feel like I'm definitely not penciling in Matthew Stafford as a lock to be, I don't know if he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL anymore. And I very much respect him, and I respect the offensive play calling of the Los Angeles Rams and Sean McVay, but I would not be shocked if we start to see some regression from Stafford this upcoming season. Now, you look at the remainder of the offense as well. I mean, similar to my questions about Matt Stafford, you're also looking at an aging Cooper Kupp, where Kupp, it feels like, it's really been the two standout years more than anything with him. He sort of just emerged onto the scenes in, 2021 was the really big year. 2019 as well. Those are the two standout seasons. The only two seasons he has over 1,000 receiving yards, which can be, a little bit picky there at that mark, considering Kupp has been dealing with injuries since then. And that is still a real conversation with him, as he's now a wide receiver headed into his age 31 season. So as much as you'd like to think, when he's healthy, he can always produce. Is he going to be healthy the entire year? I have some concerns with that. And outside of him, now luckily you have Puka Nacua stepping in to make up, some of the difference there, and had an extraordinary season last year. The rest of the wide receiver core is fine. Tutu Atwell has at least shown some flashes of being somebody who could be a slot receiver in the NFL. Obviously, very, very small, but he's fast and he can make plays. So, I mean, somebody that was sort of, the Rams were knocked down a little bit, I feel like, by a lot of media outlets when they made that pick back a few years ago. But I think Tutu Atwell's a fine contributor for them. Jordan Whittington, a wide receiver out of Texas that they just drafted in this past year's draft. I mean, anytime the Sean McVay gets his hands and, picks out a wide receiver, I'm going to at least pay attention to it and keep an eye on the name. I think they'll have a fine rushing game. I mean, this was a very good offense last year, top 10 in just about every statistic, and I think that Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp, like I'm talking about, injuries could maybe get in the way of that, but I mean, I still think that they have good talent overall. The offensive line is solid. That was an issue for them in 2022, but that was sort of the priority, was upping the offensive line. They signed Jonah Jackson, former Pro Bowler with the Lions, to a new contract, 3 years, $51 million. They re-signed Kevin Dotson, who was an important part of their offensive line last season, a training camp acquisition in 2023, and ended up, being one of the go-to guards for them. I think it's just going to be a solid starting group. Alaric Jackson is going to be suspended for the first 2 games of the year, but a very nice left tackle there. As long as, last year was his breakout season, as long as he can continue to build on that. And then their 2023 second-round pick, Steve Avila, is taking over the center spot, where last year he started all 17 games at left guard. So a little bit of a change up there, but overall still personnel pretty good overall. But this defense is where you start to look at some of the losses, where you lose Aaron Donald, one of the greatest Rams in history, one of the greatest defensive players in history. You can sort of have that debate amongst yourself. I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to say on that in the comment section. But Aaron Donald, massively decorated defensive tackle for the Rams, for sure to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He ends up retiring, so that's not something that you think you can just plug in the gaps a little bit to replace there. And then they also lost their defensive coordinator in Raheem Morris, who was a massive part of this Rams defense overachieving last season. And doesn't help as well the fact that he brought a couple of other assistants with him to Atlanta in Zach Robinson and Jimmy Lake. So the Rams, some significant turnover on the defensive side of the ball. And ultimately, again, the numbers weren't extraordinary last year, but this is a defense that people were sort of chalking up to be one of the worst in the league, and that's most certainly not what they were by the end of the season, because they had a lot of standout young defensive players, whether you want to look on the front line, talk about a Kobe Turner, a Byron Young in that front seven. In the secondary, Quentin Lake ended up being a nice development for you. I think that this is a very fine defense. Now, it's not spectacular. We just live reacted to the fact that they traded Ernest Jones, their leading tackler from 2023 as well. That is another pretty substantial loss, and I definitely don't feel great about their linebacking core. I like Byron Young. I like the selection of Jerod Verse in the first round. I thought that was a steal, getting him at 19th overall. But Omar Spates and Christian Roseboom, that's pretty underwhelming to me. Now, that being said, it's a new system there defensively. I'm not sure exactly to what degree the Rams are going to try and switch things up after, Raheem Morris is out of there, and in steps, I believe it is Chris Shula. That is their defensive coordinator for this upcoming season. Somebody who has been with the Rams 7 years prior and has at least been in the building, that it's not like it's this entirely new situation, but that's a lot of losses to sort of try and make up for, and ultimately, I think it's a pretty mediocre group. Now, that being said, there was a lot of talk about what the Rams were going to do at the NFL draft. Sean McVay finally having a first-round pick which felt like obviously they were sending out a bunch of them in that deal for Matthew Stafford years ago. But there was a lot of talk about whether or not Sean McVay would look to get himself a new toy to play with, being the offensive mastermind that he is. But instead, Rams went defensive heavy in the draft, where they took 3 defensive players in the first 3 rounds. I believe in total it was something like, I have the number here somewhere, 5 of their first 6 selections, I believe, were on the defensive side of the ball. I'm definitely a fan of the Florida State crew that they brought in the first 2 rounds, Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. So hopefully helping out that front line. They end up signing Tre'Davious White as a veteran presence, which could be a nice player to line up across from Darius Williams, who had a nice season for himself last year. So we'll see. Again, I think that there's definitely some mediocrity on the defensive side of the ball, and I with a changing in defensive coordinator, I'm just sort of iffy on that group as well. So looking at their schedule for the upcoming season, pretty middle of the pack in terms of strength of schedule, but what stands out to me is I think it's, a pretty good list of teams through those first 5 weeks. You are at Detroit for a playoff rematch. Matt Stafford going back to Detroit. We heard the boos last year. Ended up being an incredible game, but I think the Lions got better this offseason as well. They are then at Arizona, which yesterday I talked about. I think the Cardinals can be sneakier than people are giving them credit for. And they're home against the 49ers, at Chicago, and versus Green Bay. That's a pretty tough slate to start the year. And then you get your bye week. So you could be sitting in a hole where I think it's conceivable that they could go 1-4, maybe 2-3 during that stretch. And then you get your bye week and you have a long season ahead. Now, I think it gets significantly easier from there, where you look at sort of that second 67% of the season for the Rams, and they're definitely in better positions, I would argue, with some of the difficulty of opposing teams, that you'll get a game. You still have both your games against the Seahawks. Those are going to be massively important, in my opinion, for the Rams to stay ahead in the division this year. You get home games against Miami and Philly, home game against Buffalo as well. Ultimately, I think that the schedule lightens up a lot in the second half of the season, and that's where it's going to start to be interesting. But I think this is an NFC West team or NFC West division that no team is a total rollover. I know that a lot of people aren't giving the Cardinals their respect right now, and I can understand the concerns why, but I'm just a little bit higher on them, and I'm just not as high on the Rams. I think it's a lot of turnover. It's a lot of production you're asking from some of your older players, and Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp and Tre'Davious White on the defensive side of the ball, losing your leading tackler, your defensive coordinator, some other key staff members, losing your defensive and locker room leader in Aaron Donald. So I think this year is going to be not a total letdown for the Rams, but I think it's going to be a little bit disappointing. I believe that Sharp Football Analysis has their over-under line at 8.5 wins, and I do have them going under that, and with a record of 7-10. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Again, I really respect Matt Stafford from, everything he's been able to give out throughout the course of his career. I'm also a huge believer in Sean McVay, the offensive mind, and I think that it's capable that he is, even despite some concerns, able to manufacture a good offense. I worry about that defense this year, though. And, maybe this is going to be a nice breakout spot for Chris Shula in this new role, but I think there's a lot of holes there that you're going to have to, get really good production from some young players. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Again, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you for all of our commenters throughout the show. Always appreciate having the interaction and getting to know what your guys' thoughts are as well. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back same time tomorrow at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.